I think we're all here for very much the same reason. But maybe where we will disagree is the how when it comes to rethinking our cities and how we do that. With anything, a city is embodiment of our space, our democracy, young democracy, if I might add. It's messy, it's complex, there's tensions, it's sticky, or sometimes it's very dangerous as well. So for us, we want to have a dialogue. So maybe for introductions, my name is Roland Posma. I have a funny accent, apologies. I'm from Pretoria. I speak Afrikaans, so again, I do apologize for the accent. I'm from something called Young Urbanists of Africa. We are NPC. We're here to support young people and change the narrative of our towns and cities, and ultimately say that if we rethink our cities, we can save our country. And then I'm joined here today by Lorenzo Davids, Jonny Friedman, who have been much more longer around than myself and many of you, because I do see a very young audience, which I'm very excited for. So thank you so much for being here. And I guess we can all agree, it's not, when we say young, it's not about age, it's about passion. It's about our dreams, aspirations. So I really want to thank you all for being here today. I'm not very big on introductions. I think let's talk, let's have a conversation, let's disagree, and let's perhaps learn and meet new people. We'll have a networking event, so just a bit of housekeeping rules. This is being recorded, so please don't say anything you don't want to say. That goes to you guys as well. I can say anything. No, that's not true. And again, today we will actually open this conversation up to the floor. I have lots of questions, so there's a reason I have my phone, because a lot of people submitted questions, so there's a whole list, but we're not going to get for everything, but I think we'll try our best. And then in terms of toilets, if you want a toilet, go up the stairs, it's unisex, Bob's your uncle, and then if you haven't had a drink, please welcome yourself. First of all, I really want to say thank you to Urban Lime, the colleague sitting there in the corner, hello, for sponsoring this event and making this a reality. This is the first talk at Speaker Corners and other spaces in our cities where we'll be working with Urban Lime. So we're very excited because we're going to have more dialogues. And even in the backdrop of COVID, I'm so happy and I can't believe we're sitting here. But I'm going to ask the two panelists here to introduce themselves. I know them, but I'm curious to know how they will introduce themselves to you guys, to myself. And then I'm going to be very strict on time for this dialogue. So if I politely tell you I'll signal something, I'll use the Constitution. I'm not being rude, so I do apologize in advance, but we want to have a dialogue and have some conversation here around our cities. So I'm going to start with Jonny to perhaps introduce yourself and then perhaps say, why are you today? Why are you here today? Thank you. 1 minute or less, more.
Not a bad for a guy who doesn't do intros. But thank you for that, and thank you for your organising what we have tonight. And firstly, a very big thank you to everybody who's here. One of the things I can tell you about urban regeneration and making cities work is that it demands dynamic action. It demands motivation, commitment, and dynamism, and it demands things to be moving. It constantly needs to be dynamic, moving forward, and it needs to be a process which has public engagement and that starts with the people who live, work, and are committed to particular neighbourhoods, districts, and places. So the conversation at this particular level, at the grassroots level, is absolutely critical to making and changing spaces. And it starts here. And unless it has momentum, and unless it brings people out, unless it engages with people and starts inspiring people to think about what places could be and how we can move from where we are to what's possible, it's critical that we have conversations like this. So what we do at Urban Lime is we think about spaces, and we've been doing it for 30 years. We started in London in the late 80s in the East End of London, in Shoreditch, Clerkenwell, Whitechapel, areas like that, and we were one of the first developers to open in the East End of London. And I started working here in 2005 in South Africa, and we're excited by the possibilities of cities. And if you When we first came here in 2004, they told me very clearly you could not go into the city because it was too dangerous. And in fact, if you did come into the city, there was nothing much to do here. And unlike the other South African cities, which were sort of re-inhabited by their populations, by the African populations, Cape Town is an aberration, didn't really have that. And literally in '04, was pretty much abandoned and needed to be rethought, repurposed, reinvented from the perimeters into the center. And what's interesting about where we are right here today is that we're literally in the center of the city. Church Square is the center, and we're sitting here today with this amount of people. I can tell you in '04, very, very few of you would have come to Church Square in the evening. So our business is about transforming spaces, about reinventing places that have gone out of fashion, about rethinking areas, districts, neighborhoods, and cities. And we're passionate about it at Urban Lime. Personally, it's what I live and breathe. And I'm very thankful to Roland, the young Urbanists, and all of you for being here this evening. Cut me off there.
I was about to. Thank you, Jonny. And then perhaps Lorenzo, introduce yourself. I think Jonny gave a good backdrop of South African cities, and perhaps why do you care about South African cities as yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Lorenzo. I was born here 61 years ago. I have commuted in the city. I'm a public transport user. I take buses, trains, and taxis to get around. I live in a suburb. I have 2 kids. They use public transport. Because I want to live in a city that I can celebrate, not be scared of. I want to live in a city that doesn't intimidate me, but that engages me. And that city is not the CBD. Because every time we talk of the city, we talk of the CBD. That city is a much bigger space. It's interesting how people talk of Cape Town, and then they say something happened in the townships. And I say, no, something happened in Cape Town. Because in our language, those words actually mean different things. It means you don't live in Cape Town, you live in the townships. And so when something happens, it didn't happen in Cape Town. The Cape Town stats are not disrupted by that or impacted by that. It happened out in the townships. And so when I talk of the city I live in, I talk about the whole of Cape Town. So that's the one notion that's very important for me. The other thing is that I kind of, you know, in 2020 with lockdown, on the 24th of May, 2020, just before Africa Day, 25th of May, I took I took 83 homeless people into my office building. I had an office building in Bree Street, basement, ground floor, and 3 floors up, so 5 floors on the corner of Bree and Long Market, Bree and Hout Street. And I took literally 83 homeless people and said, come and live in my office and don't sleep on the streets. And so, you know, I got calls from everybody to say, what the hell did you just do? You know, they're never going to get out of there. Do you know that? And I shuttled them in with a car and a van from the station into my office building. And I said, take the whole office building. And in fact, I handed over my office keys to them. And I said, the building is now yours. And when I went to the office during that time, because I had an emergency permit to travel around, I used to sit outside my building, you know, to connect to the internet, and knocked on my own front door to ask if I could come in. And that was a moment of transition for me. Because I said to them, you would have this building for 2 months, and that in 2 months' time I'll come back and talk again. And then sort of midway through that process, I said, no, let's make it 3 months, and then we can transition out. And on the day they had to transition out, they gave me a building that was cleaner than what I gave them. All 83 of them left the building. Not a single thing was stolen, not a laptop, not a computer, not a cup, not a saucer. Nothing was broken. I had 83 people sleep on every available place in that building, on the floors, behind the desk, under the desk, all over the place. And I left that building, and the man who was in charge of the project handed me the keys, and he said, I'd like to walk you through the building with 3 of my colleagues, and can you tell us what you see that's wrong in your building? And that began to help me see how we've othered people because we don't find them in our spaces, and so therefore they must be other. But they are not. They actually make the space in the same way we wish to see that space. Different, yes, but it's the same safety, it's the same health, it's the same hygiene. I got served, tea and coffee in my own office mugs, and there was nothing wrong with it. And when they moved on, I began to reflect on the kind of country I want to live in. I want to close this comment by saying that I hope to live in this city until I'm 102 years old. And the reason why I want to do that is that I one day want to live in my fourth old age home, because I destroyed the other 3 with wheelchair races and knocking on people's doors at 3 o'clock in the morning to come and play cards or dominoes. And when I sit there, somehow, I want my grandkids to bring their friends to check me out. And I want my grandkids, hopefully, to tell the story of a guy who's their grandfather that helped to build one of the greatest cities on earth. I want them to have that story. I don't want them to see a city that continues to be as divided as we find it today. I want them to run in and say, I want to show you the man that helped build one of the greatest cities on earth. And that must be true of our children, but it should be true of children everywhere in the world, that they wake up thinking they live in the greatest city on earth because of what you and I decide, how we live in that city. And so today I do consulting work around urban design, urban planning, but about how humans engage with each other to build the kind of safe spaces that we all find. As Jonny said, let's go outside, Jonny, and stand on the curb and have a drink, and nothing will happen to us. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that sets the tone and the kind of context of why we're talking, but also individually. And from that anecdote from both of your experiences in cities and design, it speaks about having a city that's safe, that's exciting, inclusive, but then it speaks to the kind of country we became when we transitioned from 1995 around justice, around democracy. So some very strong things, but a lot of similarities and perhaps a bit of tension. So now you both went more than 1 minute, so thank you for that. I just want to point that out. So I just want to quickly, in responding to that, Jonny, what's one thing that's currently not working in cities, but I really want you to keep it to at least 1 minute. Thank you.
Look, it's so interesting what you say, because, Lorenzo, what you're pointing to is that we still completely live under the shadow and the legacy of apartheid and the tremendous and destructive nature of what that did to this country. And how, although in some ways I spoke to the positive, that we're sitting here right in the center of this city, and that's a positive. And there has, of course, been transformation since 2094, end of 94. But in so many ways, we're still so totally affected by that history. A history and a geography and a political system which was designed to separate us, which was designed to move people away from cities, to move people, to workers away, and they had to travel into this CBD, which you talk, a district where they could come and work, come in, spend 2 hours coming in, 2 hours going out. And the geography of everything, not only the geography, but also the architecture. The architecture was designed to protect, defend. So it was never about the street. It was never about looking outwards. It was always about looking inwards. It was always about point-to-point locations. I'll get in my car, I'll go to a specific location, I will go there, I'll park, I go up, I go down, I go out, I go back. It was never about designing cities which were actually for people. Apart from, of course, you speak to certain people, Durban, which they haven't been to, by the way, for 20 years, the centre of Durban. That used to be such a wonderful city, they say. I say, when last did you actually go to Durban, to the centre? I haven't been there for years. They don't even know what it looks like today. And actually what I can tell you, very different from this city, it's a proper, serious, busy, mainly fit for purpose African city, full of people and with vibrant high streets, which actually still doesn't exist properly in Cape Town. So what I'm saying, and I know I've only been given a minute, is that what I'm saying is we still live under a tremendous burden of what was. And what we try so hard to do is to start breaking down perceptions, start inviting people back in, start saying, well, actually, the perceptions around this city are wrong. Start engaging with your study, start opening up architecturally your buildings, start engaging with the street, start creating spaces that people can feel safe, secure, excited about. Young people can start engaging, walking, that there's unexpected stuff. There's stuff which, you go to any of the great cities around the world. This is starting to look like one of the great small cities of the world. But of course, everyone who comes here, they don't go to the hinterland. They don't realize there's 1.5, 2 million people living in poverty a few miles from where we're sitting right now. And they don't engage. They don't see Langer as part of this city. They don't even know what Langer is. So what we have to engage with, firstly, we have to understand that Cape Town is an aberration in our cities. You know, it's not an African city in the same way as Durban and Johannesburg is. It has gone a lot further because of its geographical, locked in by the mountain on one side and the ocean on the other. So it's a small bowl, and in effect, that's been regenerated and it's becoming a very exciting and potentially one of the world's great small cities. We have a lot more issues outside of Cape Town, you know, in the other cities. And also around perceptions of cities and how to stop this sort of massive sort of just urban sprawl into some sort of weird safety behind high walls and shopping centres and sort of big concrete boxes. That's not where city life equals. And I think for me, you're talking about, in a sense, what your vision about and also your aspiration. For me, opening up South African cities and making them a place where people want to live and work and feel safe, and democratic spaces which feel like they're just open and available to everyone at all levels. Not a place where people travel in for hours to work and travel out or go point to point, where they become dynamic, youth-led, exciting, and dynamic places where, of course, when you create that, business will follow. Yeah. Business will follow. I stop.
Thanks.
Sorry.
No. I think any background information. Now, I just want to quickly, sorry, Lorenzo, I'm going to get to use. We want to talk about, okay, what are the actions? You know, because with most of these talks, we talk about this ideal. Sorry, thanks for coming. Is that we talk about this idea of what city we want to become, but then, okay, how can we do it? What are the core things we need to fix? Because some people here are from the city of Cape Town, some people are here in private sector, some people in the civil side like myself, or some people are young people. So we want to know what are the pathways. So we really want to go into that. But I think you guys are setting up a great framework of what's happening across South Africa, and it's not a copy and paste exercise. So Lorenzo, just to be fair, I'm going to give you at least 2 minutes to kind of respond to Jonny around our cities, and then I want to go on to more specifics. Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you know, I think what is missing in the sort of South African narrative at this stage is an intellectual bravery. We are not brave intellectually. We actually hide behind the sort of narratives that make us feel comfortable. But we know it's a betrayal of what we actually believe and think. If you understand, I think some of the city people are here, they can correct the data, but you know, when 2/3 of the city is eking out a life of poverty, and the economy grows, but can't absorb them, just absorbs the 1/3 continuously, then you're going to have a potential chaos at the gates at some point. Because 2/3 of the population of the city is going to need employment, income, and food security. And without them, I was looking at a stat the Deputy Mayor showed the other day that only 19% of the individuals in the city have a graduate qualification. So if the labor market in this city only grows to employ post-matric grads, and the economy for the 2/3 of the population, there's no income, there's no job opportunities, you're going to sit with a crisis within the next 5 to 10 years with a very, very serious crisis. Where will they find work? And so you think the 10 cities right now outside there is you know, it's a bit of an eyesore. It's going to be an eyesore 20 times over unless we have an intellectual bravery to say, guys, that's the stuff we've got to talk about. How do we build a city that doesn't keep pushing these people out? Because I've worked in that sector for a number of years. And I've taken homeless people home many times. And 6 months later, I meet Hanif back on the street. And he says to me, hey, I'm back. You know, like it's a victory. We're not solving anything. We think we are solving, we think we are engaging with those issues. We are not. I interviewed the Danish ambassador a few weeks ago, and he said to me, the 5 things that are missing in the South African context is trust. We don't you know, create a system of where people trust what we do, say, and act upon. The other is accountability. There isn't a sense of accountability to the issues that's before us. Pragmatism, we really don't look at things pragmatically and say, so what's the data telling us? It's not informed by data, it's all informed by sentiment. And then he said solutions, we don't come up with solutions. And then the 5th thing he said is urgency. We don't have urgency. We don't kind of come to this table and say, guys, let's fix this thing, man. You know, we can solve this. In the funding space where I work with international donors, the key question I keep on being asked is, so don't tell me what your intervention is, tell me what you're solving. They don't want to know that you have a mitigating intervention. They want to know what you're solving. Because they don't want to keep pouring money into something that you keep mitigating, but you're actually not solving it. And so they ask me the question, will the funding we provide solve the issue, or is just buying more bandages? And so that's the real challenge that we sit with, is the intellectual bravery to confront who we are. And I hope forums like these will begin to force us to be intellectually brave, to say, we can't live in a city like this anymore. We want to live in a different city. Yes, I want the street like that. I want, you know, to be safe. I don't want to see 300 cops all around me all the time, like when I go to Kigali in Rwanda, where you're always on edge. It's a clean city, but hey, everybody's watching you all the time. I don't want to live in a place like that. I want to live in a place that I can celebrate. I can walk down from that corner to that corner, not see a cop, but I will be completely safe. Because we've been intellectually brave about the place we want to live in. Policing it all the time, more and more cameras, more and more cops, more and more security, more and more of the things that lock us down, that's not safety. That's not security. I can tell you this, they will get to the gates at some point. We've not built a safe city that way. And that's the challenges we have, is that we actually trade on fear and not bravery.
Yeah, there's a big misperception, and it reflects in our spaces. Now, there's a lot that was just said, so we do want to narrow onto specifics, because I think the audience wants to have, okay, stepping away from this conversation, what can we do as a collective or as individual, whether it's in your workspace, whether it's in the type of assignment that you're writing, or it's the conversation we have, or perhaps you're friends with the mayor. So maybe for both panelists, going into 2023, what's the one thing that is not working? Be very specific, and what's the solution? What's the thing you want to resolve? And to be as specific and tangible as possible, please. Jonny, thank you.
Look, my view about what makes safe spaces, firstly, there's no cities which are completely 100% safe. In fact, nothing in life is 100% safe. But what makes, and there's 2 issues. There's actual safety, and then there's perception of safety. And they're both equally as important as each other. But when you go to actual safety, my view, what makes safe spaces are successful spaces. Safe spaces that are populated, that have lots of things to do, that have lots of people in them, that are light, and that are popular. So you have to create that. And there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation there. You have to create spaces which actually people want to come to. And when you want to do that, how do you go about doing that? You think about, well, who is there to start with? Who are the users of that space already? Who live there, who work there, who already use that space? What's their history? What are their needs? And I think that is the starting point for me. You have to think about who's there already, and how do we make it really so great for them that actually other people want to be part of that as well. So there are lots of examples where we worked previously where we've created districts and neighbourhoods which were out of fashion or had just lost their relevance for whatever reason. And we turned them into spaces which really spoke to the needs and the wants of the people who were already there and made it great for them. Once that happens, you can start on something which creates a sort of positive spiral, and other people want to come towards it. And you create spaces which are successful, and successful spaces are safe spaces, or safe enough spaces anyway, and then they also start to developing the perception of places where people wish to go to. And it builds on itself and it can expand from there. So for me, that's critical. Just turning to your point around employment and how critical cities are to that issue. This country has, a ridiculously high level of unemployment and poverty. This will never change by growth of 1% or 0.5% or negative growth. We need major growth rates, 5, 6, 7, 8%. That's the sort of number you need to transform the level and the quantum of the problem that we have in this country. Those growth rates are only going to come by creating dynamic, exciting, vibrant cities. And you have to look at every building and every area and how do you think about how to use them in this age, in this post-COVID, in this age where technology is advancing at tremendous pace, and the nature of bricks and mortar and how you use them and what's the purpose of them is just literally changing in front of our eyes. There's not a lot that I can't do at home from my phone. There's not a lot that drags me out. There's not a lot that needs me to move from my home and my phone. Almost everything. You think about working, you think about socializing, you think about how to meet people. Even all of this, we could have just done this all online. Did we need to be here? So it's critical that you look carefully at how you use buildings, how you reinvent spaces, how you rethink, repurpose, how you energize and bring people away from their phone, and how you actually integrate. You integrate the virtual and the real. In fact, that's a critical point. If there's one critical point we learned tonight, in my view it's this, is that the blend between virtual and real is getting tighter and tighter and closer as we go on. And if we're not thinking about cities and growth and how to create employment in an age where so much is going to be done through artificial intelligence, through virtual communication, so much is not, humans are not going to need to meet or even do the work, these days. And there's so much stuff which is just going to happen right there that I keep pointing to your phone, that we have to rethink these cities, these uses, these buildings. And how do we make them special? And how do we make them dynamic? And how do we attract young people? And how do we say to young people, how do we make it so exciting for them that they don't actually want to leave the city, or they want to go abroad, or they want to move from Durban to Cape Town because Cape Town is much more fun? If you don't create dynamic, exciting spaces that young people want to be in, you're going to lose your young people because they've got choice now. And if any city loses its young people, it's finished. If it's a net loser, what's its future? You've got to be a net gainer. Now, Cape Town is, I would say people are going to flock from here. They're flocking from here, from all over the place. And in fact, the fact that other parts of the country are not governed as well, or is not interesting, has not got walkable streets, have not got a lot of the things that actually we take for granted now in Cape Town. Cape Town will be the winner of that. I mean, this place is going to boom over the next 5 to 10 years in a certain sense. Whether you can integrate the people who are living 3 miles from here into that success is really the big question for this city. How do you integrate, how do you change the lives of the masses that are living there and integrate them in a proper, democratic, decent and substantive way?
Sorry, Jonny, I'm going to have to intervene there. Sorry, apologies. I hope you guys have some questions or perhaps some answers. Can be a statement. I'm not going to go there yet. Sorry.
Just a point of order. So just back on here. So we can't see.
Just very loud music.
Oh, apologies. Apologies. I'll speak louder, please. Thanks so much. Thanks for pointing that out. I hope you heard what we've just been saying. But perhaps rather than me asking a question to you, Lorenzo, now, perhaps respond to what Jonny has said around safety narrative and how do we make our spaces young. Is that the case, or is there more complexity? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to put into this space right now. Most of us who are over 35 grew up in fairly sterile cities, not integrated cities. We have no idea what the cosmopolitan integrated city is about. We grew up in spaces where there was no trading on pavements. You could walk and nobody touched you. There were, minimal cars on the road. You would drive and there was no major crisis around getting in and out of cities. We have no concept of a city other than that. And so what you must understand is that your brain keeps referencing the city you grew up in, the neighborhood you grew up in, and imagining a city, like any of the major cosmopolitan cities around the world, is a foreign thing to our brains. We can't imagine living in a city like that. A few years ago, I lived on Broadway in a hotel that was part hotel and part old age home, and it was a one-floor bathroom. One bathroom per floor, and so in the mornings, me and old Frankie goes to the bathroom together, and then we go out and we sit down in the diner downstairs and have dinner and walk, down Broadway, and the whole city became alive because there were cars, there was everything. You look at pictures of Cape Town of 1960, and you compare pictures of New York or London of 1960, worlds apart. The stark difference between sterility and integration is there for all to see. So if I ask you to imagine a cosmopolitan integrated city, it's the hardest thing to do. Because what you probably yearn for is the sterility, not the integration. The stuff that works, the stuff that nobody touches you on the pavement, the public transport is not squeezed, etc., etc. Jonny's right. Bringing more people in creates more safety. Yeah, there's an aspect of risk that rises. If I go on a full train in the morning, it's the safest space for me on the planet. If I go on an empty train, I kind of feel like, how safe am I now? A full train is the safest thing at 6:30 in the morning. It's a cool spot to be, in fact. And I wanted to just point out here that how do you bring people into these spaces is the question. So that they feel they belong. They're not gawking at it all the time. They're not kind of feeling like, a deer in the headlights thinking, what is happening here? I mean, I look at events like First Thursdays and I go like, there's a lot more that should be happening in that space. It's actually at risk of becoming a bit of a, classist event. Because of the way it's responded to its population. And there isn't the sense of it's a celebration of who we are as Cape Town. It's a celebration of class and culture and academic standing. It's not a celebration of people. And so if you don't have class, academic standing and all of that, you kind of don't fit into you just go and gawk. You just walk with your kids and hold their hands and you gawk. I have 2 children. And they both had colic when they were growing up, and so they couldn't fall asleep. And my wife and I used to put them in the car at night and drive them into the city. And when they grew up, 5, 6 years old, that was the thing to do, was to come into the city and just park and walk here, even at the times when it was dangerous. Because I wanted them to see the city. I didn't want this place to be a strange thing to them. I wanted them to see the traffic at night or at 12 o'clock in the afternoons. So that notion that we know how to do this, I doubt that. I doubt that seriously. I know what we think we know, but when I look through my calendars of 1960, I see a different picture on the old calendars of what Cape Town was like and what South Africa was like then. That's not the city we want to build. And the problem is we're not being honest about that. We can't reconcile that in our minds. The real challenge for us is to be able to have these frank, honest conversations, to engage with it, to sit with a Jonny and to sit with, the guy across the road who runs the Vida or the Seattle Coffee, and to sit with, the homeless guy and the commuter and the taxi guy. And why is it that we have humans who tell their stories in New York and we all go gaga over reading those stories, but in South Africa, we just kind of avoid it? Why is it that we fly to New York and get on a plane, get on a train, or to Amsterdam and get on a train, or even to New Delhi and get on a train, but here it's like, it's for the poor? So the narratives are very screwed up here. And if we say we're going to build this brave city, then it has to start with the kind of conversations we hold. Because I'm going to say to you, the mold is not right. What we're pouring the cement into, that mold, that's not the right mold. It's not going to hold. And again, I keep saying to people, great cities fell, and you can obviously go around the world and you know the histories of that. Great cities fell because at some point, the leaders thought they knew better than the people. If you boil down the narratives, whether it's in Cairo, whether it's in Rome, whether it's Athens, whether it's the great civilizations in the East or in South America, they fell because the leaders at some point thought their next step is the right one, and then it proved to be the wrong one. And the city fell. If you don't keep your ear to the ground to what people are saying, the city will fall at some point.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to say we can have more of these conversations, Lorenzo, changing the narrative dialogues. So time is flying, it's scary enough. And I really want to open this conversation to the floor. And I'll be asking for questions, perhaps not statements, so please. But what I want to ask now from you two is go into what we need to change. What's the funds? I think a few themes. What's the specific thing? Can we be as specific, please, in terms of what, from your perspective, we need to change? What do we need to do? Who is responsible for that? So what do we need to change and who's responsible? So if we can be as quite clear on that. Jonny, thank you so much.
Look, I think a huge amount has changed. This city, since I've been working here, has transformed in many ways. But I think key elements to be connectivity is tremendously important. Connecting areas and allowing spaces to be walkable or easily movable between. I think you could do things like, I think at the moment the waterfront is very disconnected still from the city, and it seems ridiculous given that the jump is literally, it's a few hundred meters, but yet there's that massive road in between, and creating a connection between where we're sitting now and the waterfront could be done in multiple different ways and would create a connection which would make it a more interesting walkable city in my view. So I think creating connections is very important. I think walkability is very important. I think the perception of our city is very important. So putting in proper lighting, proper, basic stuff, proper modes of moving quickly and easily from one part of the city to another part of the city. I mean, we've looked at things like cable cars. They could create a great connection between here, for instance, and the waterfront. Very easy, very direct. Up to 4,000 people an hour can travel on a cable car, and it's actually extremely viable, extremely cheap. So it would be a great connection between center of city and waterfront, create connections straight like that. It's not the only option, but it's a very easy, low-tech, relatively option which could move a lot of people and connect the city. But perception is very important. But one of the main things I think you've got to do, and I slightly differ from you in this, what you were saying, Lorenzo, in the sense that I love just walking around the city. I love being a voyeur of the city. I love just walking the city in itself. For me, a good city, a great city, is a tremendous pleasure. I would say one of the great pleasures in life is just to feel like you're part of a city. A city is actually the greatest theatre in many ways. And you have to talk to that sort of humanness of it, create the heart in it. If you can create that sort of passion and heart and humanness and excitement and dynamism, that's just actually fun to be a part of. Like walking around New York, talk about walking around New York. I grew up in London. You could just walk and walk and walk and walk in London. There's no particular, well, there is they have one financial district, but that's almost not London. London has got multiple different neighbourhoods. You can just walk between lots of different centres and parks in between and all sorts of things. You can spend your whole day just walking and walking and walking and walking. It's just fabulous fun and entertainment in itself. You have to create that. That is what a great city has to be. Once you create that, guess what? People flood towards it internationally, nationally, and the business pours in there, and all the business to support all of those people, and also the business all business commerce wants to be part of it. But what you have to create first is that heart. And creating the heart is lots of different stuff. You have to create a virtual element to it. You have to create tons of different things to do. You need to get away from blank concrete walls. Every few seconds you should be seeing, engaging with, looking at, thinking about, and having some sort of impact upon you in your essential impact throughout your walk and your experience, and with a million and one different things to do. That's what a great city is about. It's about, and the way to get that is to think about every space and think about every experience, and what does it feel like to walk between these areas and do these things, and what do you do there, and how do you impact, and what's exciting for different people. And think about all the different people, and not only think about it throughout the day. What do you do there in the morning? What do you do there in the afternoon? Who's there? What does it look like in the afternoon? What does it look like at night? You know, in Rio, the Copacabana and Ipanema, it's busiest at 1 o'clock in the morning. The beach side, they light the whole sand. They create a million and one things to do. There's bars, there's nightclubs, there's entertainment, there's sports, people playing volleyball. It's an exciting, dynamic, incredible space, and the busiest times 1 o'clock in the morning. And what are most people doing? They're walking down the promenade, just taking it in. They're actually, and everyone can do that. That's a democratic space. That's entertainment for everyone. So for me, that's the objective here. And out of that creates democratic space, and out of that creates employment, because the business follows. The money follows, the corporate stuff follows. Don't focus on the corporates first, focus on that. Create that heart space, that amazing dynamic space that people want to be a part of. The cash comes later, and the economy boosts for the economy, the jobs come later.
So a few things you're highlighting is the narrative, and then we're talking about mobility. So if we design for cars, we might not have an exciting, walkable, democratic city. Of course, we have to create these areas, and then everything else will come. Perhaps it would be interesting how to create these areas and how to make these areas affordable. But I'm going to go to Lorenzo. Maybe on top of that, you know, what's one thing that's not working, and who's responsible for that? I really like to understand, and I think Jonny has really given a good base. But who's responsible for that? And maybe just to add, what's not working. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly easy to say who's responsible for things not working, because largely it's the city. You know, there's the provincial government as well, but to a greater degree, it's the people who do, you know, it's all the planning functions within the city, the design functions within the city that may not be delivering what it should be to get to the dream of a great city. It takes too long. There's competing priorities or competing agendas in terms of what it should look like. The end vision is not clear, so we are not agreed on what the end vision should be. I love the fact that, so those for me are critical pieces of this pie that's not holding together. If the planning function fails in this city, then we're in a mess. And not just fails in that it doesn't do anything or nothing gets accomplished, but if it ends up as a competing agenda between agents within the city, then we are sunk. And right now, that's literally where it's at. It's a competing agenda. It's not a common vision. If you were to ask anyone in the city now, what's the common vision for the city? You know, I mean, I was reading through, you know, part of the IDP and special development frameworks earlier on, And they speak of a just city, and I think, okay, so let's put justice as the conversation then. What's the justice lens? If we're going to say we're seeking to build a just city. And that's a whole different conversation. Suddenly, on the planning function of a city, if you say, hold on, one of our key outcomes is justice. But it's there, it's in the spatial development framework. So it's all these things that I think have been, these terms that have been loosely used in planning that actually just gets pushed aside. It's a pretty document, but in terms of the competing agendas, it gets sunk almost at the point when it comes off the printer. That for me is problematic. The second thing that I think is important, and Jonny made this reference, I think that design should happen around a walkable city. The city you should be able to walk to anywhere. The fact that you must take your car if you're in the top end of Bree Street to get down to the Grand Parade is bizarre. We should just say, walk guys, walk. Once a month I walk from where I am positioned just up here at 15 on Orange. I walk the 18 kilometers along Main Road to where I live in Plumstead. I walk it. And why do I walk it? Because I want to. I want to say that should be normal in my city. And I have my backpack on and I walk. And yeah, am I at risk of some criminal effort? Yes, I am. But like I said to Fikile at some point in a tweet, when the stations were all broken, I said, I will stand on a pile of bricks that used to be my station and tweet you and say, sir, what time will the 7:10 a.m. train arrive? If we don't defy the system that imprisons us, cuts us down, we lose all bravery. And so I will walk down Main Road with my backpack and in some foolish way, I suppose, defy the crime that will come at me. But if I don't, who will? Someone else will be the next victim. And so we reclaim spaces not just by painting the buildings and changing the design. We claim it by presencing ourselves with our energy in those spaces and say, no, I'm not standing for this. I'm going to walk from the top end of Adelaide Street here all the way down Main Road to Plumstead and say, guys, it was a great walk. 3.5 hours, it was a great walk. Nothing happened to me. And slowly you reclaim the spaces that once was that they spoke about as, ooh, don't walk through Salt River. Ooh, don't walk past Gympie Street. Oh, don't walk past Woodstock. I don't want to live in a city like that. When my daughter started university, I said to her, darling, there's a train. Take a train. And she jumped on a train and took a train to Claremont and then on a jammy shuttle to UCT. The city that we live in should live in our heads first. And that just, equitable, we have a wonderful preamble to the Constitution, and the preamble to the Constitution has 6 words in it. It calls us to respect each other as citizens. It says that we have to build a just country, an equitable country. We have to build an inclusive country. We have to build a safe country. And we have to build a country that's prosperous for all. That's the preamble to the Constitution. Respectful, just, equitable, safe, inclusive, and prosperous for all. Every day. I kid you not. Every day I wake up. And that's my mantra. I get out of bed building that kind of city. And I'm not going to stop until it's done. Because if you and I don't do that, who will? If we miss this opportunity to build that kind of city, who will? Our children? Should we place the burden on them to do so? The bravery, intellectually, morally, ethically, and physically, the bravery must be ours. To say, no, we will not perpetuate the apartheid city. We will not perpetuate the gangsterism city. We will not perpetuate the crime city. We will not be overrun by the narratives of negativity. We're going to place ourselves in the spaces and say, here I am. I'm here on an empty station in October 2020, or I think it's January 21, on an empty station, sir, what time will the 7:10 train arrive? Today, I was on my station alone in the beginning of 2021. Today, the 30-odd people that used to travel with me on the train, they're all back. The tweets help. Every morning I tweet my journey. Every morning I tweet my train journey and say to people, the trains are working. And slowly but surely, people are coming back.
Sorry, Lorenzo, I'm going to end you there.
I'm done.
Apologies.
You can't ask me anything anymore.
I was equitable and fair. And now I was going to ask you guys to have a final statement, because it's already 7 o'clock, funny enough. And the idea is that we still have the networking, but if it's okay with the crowds and of course the panelists, we use this the next 30 minutes to have a conversation as a group. And then hopefully get more drinks and continue and perhaps have new connections and perhaps new ideas to make our cities of our dreams. Now, I'm going to open this. I want to ask the crowd, please be very succinct in your question. I wasn't able to control them, but I'm going to control you. If at least I control someone today. Now, I don't want to control anyone, but I want to open the question, a specific question or statement. I forgot your name, I'm so sorry. But first of all, thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you, Jonny. Please, just very succinct because we are out of time. Thank you.
I love passion. I'm here for it. Studied architecture, got a master's in it, and I realized there's more talk than actual what can we do as citizens?
Thanks so much. Who wants to answer that first?
Well, I'm happy to
Go for it.
step in. I mean, firstly, just being here tonight, for instance, is helping. I mean, engagement with your city and master planning is one piece of action, and yet there's an element of master planning that's required with cities. But actually, great cities happen organically, and they happen through the energy of the individual people and the collective and the neighborhoods and the districts and the cities themselves and the people who live in those cities and work in those cities. It's an organic process, and as Lorenzo has pointed out, it has to filter from the bottom up. If it's going to be authentic and exciting and dynamic, it has to speak to all of the needs of the people that are there. And I think proper engagement and proper use of your city, break away those perceptions. Lorenzo's talking about walk the city, use the city, come to the city, do your stuff here in the city, engage with the city. Think about the city in a wider context than just this city bowl.
Yeah.
I think your point is it's a bigger city than that. But I think if you can really break down the perceptions around city, which I would say in the instance of Cape Town is to a large extent has happened already in many ways. It is a city which is walkable. It is a city which is human in scale. It's becoming more. There are other modes of transport. There are modes of transport which are starting to develop, which weren't here 15, 20 years ago. I certainly don't hark back to any sort of thing of the 60s. The last thing you want to go back to is some sort of sterile environment of a controlled city in any sort of way. Make it, even accept the fact that great cities are a little dangerous. Part of a great city is the fact that there's a little bit unexpected around the corner. Let me tell you, the greatest city at the greatest time I've personally ever been to was New York in the 80s, and I can tell you it was a pretty dangerous city. And it was the best city I've ever been to at its best. I've been back many times to New York. It's nothing like as good as when it was really dangerous in the 80s, I can assure you. It was the most exciting, dynamic place I've ever been in my life. And was it a little dangerous? Yes, is the answer. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Jonny. Lorenzo, so what I forgot to say is I'll be controlling you guys and you guys as well now, because we want to get through everyone, and I have a few questions on my phone. Thank you so much. New York in 80s, I wasn't alive sadly, but Lorenzo, please.
Just to answer the question is, you have to live in the city. When I mean live, I don't mean physically live, but you have to presence yourself here. You go into spaces and you presence yourself. Stop being just a tourist, a passerby, not observing what's happening. Talk to people. I interview car guards. I sit down and talk to strangers that I meet in the company gardens, which happens in other cities very organically, very naturally. It's crazy that I can sit on the tube in London or on the metro in New York, and some crazy person comes sits next to me and has a conversation with me, and I'm not intimidated, and I'm not threatened. I'll entertain it. Here we kind of go like, no. We've not humanized the space. We've not occupied the space. We've made it to be like, it's always weird when it happens here. It's normal when it happens anywhere else in the world. So presence ourselves here and embrace who we are.
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. Thanks so much. Anyone else? I'm just introducing yourself quickly and then, yeah.
My name is Elizabeth. I work as a town planner, urban planner for the city of Cape Town. My question is slightly different, and I think that for the majority of us, especially in the urban planning profession, we've read all these great principles we've gotten to know our city. I think the city actually has great special development frameworks, and the IDP is framed in a fantastic way. But what I've been noticing, and I don't have many years of experience, so you've got to excuse where I've got some ignorance, but what I've been noticing is that town planners, urban planners in general, have a bit of a fear going on. You don't like own, maybe owning a profession is not the right way of saying it, but I hope that you understand what I'm trying to ask. And I've been wondering, where do you start to motivate people to keep pushing boundaries, to keep having conversations with each other, to keep on changing narratives that are a little bit old-fashioned, they're not working anymore and are heavily bureaucratic and outdated, and create that long time frame that discourage other professionals to come to the party and actually make those visions a reality. Because you see that all the time within the urban planning itself and how the legislation and the bureaucracy is structured. So we kind of lose that motivation, and sometimes as we grow in our profession, we fall victim of this, you know what, I'm bored, I'm tired of pushing, I'm just going to do my job and hope for the best eventually. But I think there's something that, what would you say would be kind of the best way to approach to motivate young planners and perhaps the older planners?
Jaded.
Can I just give a quick response to that?
Yes,
because I think that's such a deep question. But the quick response to that, in my experience, and there are other town planners sitting here as well, and people, town planning and urban design is an extreme control science. The people in that discipline at the top controls what happens. And the issues of creativity and design experimentation or ideas generation often goes no further than 2 levels up, it gets killed. And what we need is a design profession, a town planning profession that opens itself up, that is not subject to austere control by politicians or the powers that be, whoever they may be. That there is a space there where designers like yourselves, excuse the pun, can go to town, on their ideas, and it's suggested in roundtables like this. It's put in the public domain. It's shown to the mayor. It's kind of, it's encouraged. It's not kind of, we don't do that here. Now just keep that. That's not for now. That's not within the framework. That's not what we want to consider now. They have such rigid timelines. This is for the next 5 years. We're just planning for 5 years. We're not going to deal with stuff that's coming up in 20 years because that's another design iteration. We have to stop that. We literally have to stop that. And I'd like to hear from the other town planners that's here, Frank and others. Your input would be very useful.
So, John, do you want to answer to that?
Look, I've just got to, first, it's a very good point, and I kind of feel your frustration, because obviously we have to, from the other side, from the private sector, we have to deal with municipalities and town planning and so on and so forth all the time. And I just say 2 things. One is where district and neighborhood development works best is when there is a very tight relationship between the public and the private sector. You're sitting in a private space here, but the street is owned by the city. The square is owned by the city. And if you don't get that interaction between the two, you can have the most wonderful private spaces, but you've got a serious problem on the street or reverse. If you can spend, in fact, interestingly, in Church Square, they spent millions and millions of rands trying to do something with Church Square before we got involved in Church Square. And they did all sorts of quite interesting stuff there. But because the private spaces weren't working, it actually made very little difference to Church Square before we started doing stuff there. So where it suddenly takes on power and becomes very productive and exciting is when the public and the private sector can work together, and the private sector works well with the town planning departments within the city. That's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make is that one of my bugbears around town planning generally in this country is that they love to think in terms of big projects, the super projects, the large, the big scale, the big money projects. What they forget to think about is the small, the little, what I call almost tactical, like a tactical urbanism type approach to things. And I am so sold by the concept of small interventions, because what they do is A, they're fast, they're cheap, and B, each time you come back, I like the projects I'm involved in, every time people come back to them, I like them to see change. You come back and say, wow, have you seen that? Have you seen? In fact, when I was walking down here, I saw that the guys that just bought that hotel over there have done like a mural on the wall of the side. I thought, wow, that's exciting, that's interesting, that's a change. Now, there's not a lot of money involved in that. There's not a lot of planning involved in that. But you know what? It actually gave me heart when I walked down Spin Street, and I saw that for the first time this evening. That is, for me, very, very important, something which is missed by town planning departments. And there's so many little interventions one can do up and down the country and in the cities, on the edges of the cities, certainly around little scrubs of land here, there, and everywhere. One can do stuff which actually makes a big difference to the heart and the feel and the safety, I would say, and the perception of the city without having to spend a lot of money. And we should be a lot more, you've used the word that we should be brave. We should be super brave when it comes to this stuff. We should have budgets which say, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And some of them might not work. And so what? If 1 out of 10 doesn't work, so what? You've got 9 that has worked and that has made a difference, and that has changed perceptions. And just for a few thousand rand here and there, not big money, you can make big change. And I really think that town planning and the cities need to be thinking carefully about that and integrating it with the private sector.
I wonder if there are any other town planning comments.
I'm not going to put anyone on the spot because I'm polite.
Yeah.
But I think that's excellent, and I'm going to speak to you afterwards because I'm a planner and I completely understand what you're saying, and that's an excellent question. But I do want to open up the room for any other conversation, any other voices. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
My name's David. Thanks for your time, guys. I'm sure it's very interesting. Something you said, Jonny, is very interesting. Obviously, in the early 2000s, there was the birth of the Cape Town Partnership and the SID. Models have been built around that throughout the world. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on if the momentum from the change that we saw in the CBD has stagnated, and if something like the Cape Town Partnership can be generalized further out than what the CBD is, by bringing the private sector in more to partner with the government to look at homelessness and to look at problems like housing shortages and social housing developments, which might then actually make a lot of change to the security and the safety issues that we might see in the city and at large.
Gentlemen, 1 minute each. I'm going to come to you, please. Sorry, I'm Jonny first. I think.
No, thanks. It's a very good question. I mean, firstly, in terms of inhabiting cities, the city's much more inhabited than it was, but there's huge potential for people living in this city. We need to move away from people living away from the city to moving in the city. There's the density here, the potential for density and people living in the city at all levels. At all, especially essential workers should be in the city, and there definitely should be social housing attached to regular residential development potential. So I think the idea of people living and working and socializing and living and having a city which is much more normalized, because that's what a normal city looks like, is that people live en masse within the city, whereas here the en masses live outside of the city in this particular city. But I think as far as township development and the complete lack of creativity in that space is an utter disgrace in this country. how it's totally not moved, or the movement has been so small and incremental since I remember it coming here as a kid in the 80s and the 90s. Not much has changed. And it really is an utter disgrace, the lack of movement, the lack of creativity, the lack of thought, the lack of investment. It wouldn't even take a huge amount to make an enormous difference to people's lives across this country, where these spaces have not been thought about really at all, hardly, beyond basic sort of in the most basic of ways. And there are lots of examples around. Look at Medellin, look at the library system. There's lots of planning, talking about town planning. There's lots of things one could do to transform the life chances and the lives of millions of people across our country. And it is actually an utter disgrace that it's not been done.
Thanks, Ronnie. So maybe to summarize, Lorenzo, the Cape Town partnership,
Yeah.
I think it has stagnated, but Lorenzo, perhaps you can add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, whether you take all the city improvement districts, in the larger Cape Town, and specifically then the Cape Town partnership that was then started by Andrew Boraine when he was city manager, and when he left the city as city manager, headed up the Cape Town partnership. I think as a think tank, brilliant. I think as an ideas generator, brilliant. As an experimentation lab, perfect. We had it in Claremont. I consulted for the Claremont Improvement District when Chris Drummond was still there. I worked on street people when Andrew and the other guy was still at the Cape Town CID. Those things are unnecessary. I don't see them as obstacles. What has happened in the ecosystem is that they became competitors. So the city feels threatened by the design potential of the Cape Town Partnership and what the CID suggests, and then there's a contestation as to whose ideas now run the city, or the neighborhood or the area that they're in. In Claremont, when we built the Claremont Boulevard, I remember those dialogues, whether the Claremont Boulevard behind the Holiday Inn should exist or not. The Claremont CID said it's a greater thing, we'll find the money for it, and the city went like, oh, but we don't just do it like that. So it's not that those things are not the right model. I think it's the perfect model. It's the contestation of the parties between the city and CIDs that really has bedeviled how they work effectively to protect you and me and make for a more usable city. So absolutely necessary.
So speak to your councillor, ask them to bring it back. If anyone, please Google the Cape Town Partnership, please. Thank you. Thanks for the excellent question. Yeah, please. No, yes.
You said we need more walkability across the metropolitan. How do we get cars off the roads? How do we get those middle, upper income people out of their cars and into
That's my favorite question, but I'm going to ask you 2 minutes each. That's all I do. I can have a better answer than with my eyes closed, but Jonny, please. Yeah.
Look, firstly, great cities need to talk to people's needs, not cars' needs. I've never seen a car having a great time, buying anything, doing any particular set of work or anything like that. It really needs to think about people first. So your perception of the city needs to be, when you think about a city and when you think about an area, you think about what do people want to do there? How does it feel to be there? What is their perception of it? What is their... So you've got to think about people's needs, number one, okay? Secondly, technology to some extent is already taking cars out of the city. A lot of our tourists that are coming here, they're not hiring cars anymore. They're taking Ubers, they're doing so. I mean, they're still in cars, but they're not using them in the same way, like one person, one car. Those days, to some extent, over. I think we have to start thinking about our roads. I mean, this city's not as bad as, I live a lot of the time in Durban. We have our head office in Durban. I've come from Durban. I was here there a few days ago. I mean, that city is unbelievable. It has like 6-lane highways, like parallel to each other, 3 of them, heading into the city, each going in one direction. I mean, it's unbelievable, the space, what you could do with that space. And they're deserted, pretty much. There's cars, but you don't need 6-lane highways to get in there. So I think there needs to be a complete rethinking of roads. I'm not completely in favour of taking cars completely out of cities. I think there's something about cars which actually adds an energy to a particular place, but I think we need to be thinking about the needs of people first. And what do they want, and how does an area work? So, yes, big areas pedestrianised. I think the opportunity that the cars are going to be less and less used means we can green cities, we can add in parks to cities, we can add in amenities to cities. But the first thinking is, what do you do with the space, and how do you make that great space for people, not for cars?
Yeah.
Then, of course, there's a whole transport element.
Yeah.
Sorry.
How do you, so let's just say the southern suburbs, okay? You've got people living in Constantia and along that whole corridor. Okay, yes, they're not using trains, they're getting in their private vehicles, and they commute into town. How do you get them out of their car and into, they still need to get there. They want convenience, safety, and want convenience.
And reliability, yes.
And reliability. And they're not going to go to that train. So what are they going to do? How are you
Do you want to talk to that, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big challenge right now for cities like ours. For one, we don't have an integrated transport system. So last mile, both ends, is problematic.
Yeah.
So when I get out of my house, is there a pickup service of sorts that can get me to a station or to a bus? When I get on the bus, I will use the same ticket I just used with the pickup service to get onto the bus or the train. And when I get to my destination, there's an e-scooter I can jump on and get to the office, whatever that may be. That kind of integrated, seamless transitioning between public transport does not exist. We are not going to get people out of cars until we have that. I did a poll on Twitter 2 weeks ago and one this Friday, where I asked people whether you would want to use buses, trains, taxis, or whatever, and everybody said, 92% said trains. This week I said, if you were to use public transport in South Africa, what is your preferred means? And I said bus, trains, taxis, minibus taxis, and I still prefer to use my own car. I think 87% or 90% said I'll still use my own car. So the mindset here is still cars, very much so. You have to lug equipment. You have to carry your laptop. I'm thrilled that nowadays I see on the new blue train, the EMU, people are opening their laptops and working.
Oh,
you know,
beautiful.
It's a kind of cool thing to see. So I think the migration is happening, but South Africa is a very card population. We are not going to get them out of their cars unless there's a seamless transition from last mile to last mile. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I might just add two things. I know I'm not speaking, is who we vote for, ward councillors, and the conversations we have around a braai with our family members around behaviour. And yeah, but I think that's a great question about how, but I'd love to talk more about that. But any other questions, any other comments? We're almost done, and then we will go towards the drink station and hopefully share some contacts and some ideas and pass forward. Any other questions, please, open to the room. Michael. Excellent question, Michael. Thank you. Maybe Jonny, can you please? Thank you.
Well, look, I mean, the concept of social housing being attached to all developments is, for instance, in London, completely standard. You know, you get your planning consents come with what they call planning gain, and that planning gain is split between the city and the developer. So there is a social housing component in every residential scheme in London. It doesn't necessarily have to happen on the site. They try and encourage it to happen on the specific site, but if it doesn't happen on the site, then it has to be provided elsewhere within the city, for instance. So, I mean, there's an element of that happening here. You probably know more than I do about the exact details of that because I'm not a residential developer. But the idea of essential workers and people living in the city has to happen at all levels, and it has to be democratic, and there has to be accessible, and there are there must be the potential for that, because people have to live at all levels in this city and other cities. So I think that type of route is the way to allow a city to remain democratic, where you, again, think about the key elements of who's there. So you can do developments which don't equal gentrification. They equal actually adding. The starting point is actually making it better for the people who are already there. I think that's critical to the thinking. So I think a combination of planning gain being split, where there's planning gain, between social and private, and a way of thinking about spaces which is democratic in nature, which is grassroots in nature. And I think that is the way you get something that's special. You cannot cut and paste and find solutions by just copying what's happening here to here and think you can do that. When places become special is when they're unique. And of course, that's when people want to be there, that's when people want to come to them, and that's when everything opens up. But I think split in those areas, I hope that speaks to your point a bit.
Thanks, Jonny. Lorenzo, and then we do need to finish up because we are running over time, and I would like us to have a chat and share some concepts with people who are starting to talk. Lorenzo?
Yeah, I mean, I think the principle of supply and demand is completely the problem in the housing market in Cape Town, because nowadays in the city, in the CBD, I mean, if you want to live here, it's gonna cost you a lot of money. What we got to do is to say that there are spaces in the city earmarked for integrated housing, where laborers, workers, essential workers, and others can live within the space. You can't have a city that's exclusively, you got to earn R1 million before you can own a property within the CBD. That's not the kind of city you're going to build. It's not sustainable. You're then going to have even greater chaos, because that gap between us who can afford to live here and those who cannot and only migrate in is going to cause greater division as a country, greater division in terms of spatial planning and all those other stuff that go with that. So how we plan and design a city in the future is that there must be, Jonny referred to, planning permission, building permissions and plan approvals come with social housing components. That's one model to do it. The other model is to say that there are parts of the city that we are designing for integration. Not just tag it on as you want to build a 10 million rand hotel, then you have to put some money in and build social housing, but it's going to be 10 k's out of town. That's not what we want. What we want is for the city to be brave enough to say, these are the spaces where we are planning, integrated housing, multiple levels of communities living together. It's in the city. Again, that's not the intellectual bravery that exists. The bravery we have right now only says that if you earn $1 million and more, $2 million and more, that's when you can afford to live here. It's an unsustainable outcome, because nobody's going to tolerate that. You're not going to have that as a tolerable city in the future. You've got to have a space where the city slowly, and I almost want to bite my lip for saying slowly, where the city deliberately says, these are land reserved for integration, where housing will be integrated here. And you can buy R1 million apartment, and you can buy a 300,000 rand apartment, and it's here. It's in the same block. Why is it that I can live downstairs in a building in Manhattan, downstairs, but on the top floor there are six penthouses, but the guys downstairs, boy, it's a kind of shaky ground. But there are three penthouses upstairs. It works in other parts of the world. And again, South Africa, our problem is that we are so scared. We lack the bravery to be truly human.
Perception narrative, yes. Now, there's a lot of negative things, and rightfully so, not to water down the severe crisis we face as a country, as a city. A lot of good things happening in Cape Town, but there's a lot that is going wrong. But I want to end the note on something positive, what's happening in 2023. And then I would encourage us to all meet, ask more questions to Lorenzo and Jonny, And hopefully you learn something, and as a contact that you share, but something positive that is happening, because I know there are positive things. Please, Jonny.
I'm very happy to start with that. Trust me, if you weren't here in 2000, this is a city which is a whole lot better than then. And in fact, the trajectory, in my view, is fantastically positive for Cape Town. I think there is bravery required in terms of planning, in terms of how the public and private sector work together. But the growth projection in terms of population, in terms of almost everything, I think Cape Town is absolutely sitting in a sweet spot, in my view. And there's a lot to do, but it's already, in my view, one of the great small cities in the world. And it needs to build on that, and it needs to become more inclusive. It needs to start thinking about the hinterland, the issues that we made before. But it's a great little city. And it's not a mistake that people come from all over the world who can go anywhere. The world's very mobile, it can go anywhere. They come here a lot, en masse. Right now, the place is packed. There's been weeks of this summer where you couldn't get a hotel room or Airbnb or anything. And these are people who can go anywhere they want, and they choose to come right here. And this is a great little city. And it has the potential to just go better and better and better. And I think with some bravery, with some commitment, with some really speaking to youth culture and the wider population, trying to start including more people, it has potential to employ its people as well. And when that happens, those people too can rise up and enjoy what it has to offer. So I'm deeply positive. And as a company, Urban Lime, we're heavily investing here. We are working with major corporates and major other companies who've got all sorts of issues around what do you do with buildings at the moment that are no longer relevant in the post-COVID environment, in the technological world, where literally if you take sort of half the office blocks in Cape Town and think of them as a cube, you could probably cut that cube in half. And what do you do with the other half? And that for me is an exciting prospect, what you do with the other half. And that's right for now, and if we get that right, I think the future is very, very bright.
Thanks, Jonny. Lorenzo, please.
I have no further comment.
Okay. Now, like I said, this is not the first or last dialogue, and we are interested in change. And as an NPC, we have a few avenues around that. So, for planners, for architects, for landscape architects, non-planners, for young people, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, South Africa is young, it's youth, it's urban, and we have a dream, we have aspirations, but there's a lot of misrecognition, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of hatred, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of exciting things that are happening, and we need to be more pragmatic and believe in something. And so I really want to thank you all for being here tonight. I know we're over time, and that's unprofessional, so I do profusely apologize. It's all my fault, so I'll happily take that. But I want to encourage you to make a new contact, to have a conversation, and to really believe that you're not alone in whatever dream or whatever idea that you're aspiring to. But you can think with us that we need to rethink our existing cities. But it starts with all of you. And so thank you so much for being here. And very awkwardly, please make us swear to the drinks. And yeah, thanks so much for being here tonight. And thank you so much for Jonny, for Urban Lime, for support, for organizing this and helping this. And Lorenzo, the conversation is not closed. I think we have a long way to go, and I look forward to what we achieve this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you.